Hi guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates and today we're going to talk about sprite sheets. We'll begin as always by taking a quick look at what we're going to cover in this video. First, we'll take a look at what sprite sheets are and where they're used. We'll then examine some of the advantages to using them before we build our own sprite sheet from our PSD layout. Lastly, as ever, I'll ask you to complete a small task before we jump into the next video. Now, you'll be familiar with sprite sheets if you're into your computer games, as that's where they originate. A sprite sheet is typically a single bitmap image comprised of a number of graphic assets. In computer games, there'd be a sprite sheet for each element, a character for example, in its various states. If you visit chrome.angrybirds.com and use the inspector to examine the elements, you'll find that the game is built with a large number of sprite sheets. Now, these sheets contain each character in all of the possible states, and it's these sheets which are then used to animate the birds. The same principle can apply to web design. You can place all or a great deal of your graphic elements on one bitmap and then use that sprite sheet to decorate your various elements. You might place background textures, icons, logos, button images on your sprite sheet. Here is an example used by the Next Web. It's a large sparse PNG file containing all the elements you'll recognize from the site. And here's another example, which will hopefully be familiar to you. You can clearly see the Web Design Tuts logo, a couple of buttons and icons, such as those used on the preview thumbnails to indicate the basics or a premium tutorial. And these sheets are used as the background image for various layout elements. We create the element, determine its dimensions, and then apply the background image, specifying the coordinates on the sheet for the graphic we want to use. We're effectively masking the sheet with our element. So that's what a sprite sheet is, but why would you arrange your graphics like this instead of using a collection of small images? Well, the first advantage is file size. Take a look at the Web Design Tuts sprite for example. Here you can see the whole PNG saved at 41 KB. And then there's a folder with all the composite pieces saved as separate files. They total 78 KB. So even with all the additional white space we have on the sprite sheet, we've halved the cumulative size of the file. And this is just a small example. Your site may have much more in the way of graphics, in which case the saving would be greater still. The second advantage is organizational. It's far preferable to have one file where all your images can be found. It makes for much less messy project folders, and it's quicker if any editing needs to be done. The third and possibly most crucial advantage is faster page loading time. We've already mentioned the file size, so that obviously helps, but combining your graphics into just a few sprite sheets minimizes the HTTP requests the browser has to make when loading your page. When loading, each time your web page requires an asset, a graphic or CSS file, whatever, it makes a call to the web server which sends it back to the browser. There's a limit to how many of these HTTP requests to the same domain can occur simultaneously, so in cases where a lot of assets are needed, you can get a bottleneck forming. By just requesting a single sprite sheet and committing it to the browser's cache, you're saving a ton of load time. Okay, enough talking. Let's get busy and take our own graphic elements to build a sprite sheet for use on our website. So we'll exit our presentation and we'll open up Photoshop and our layout PSD there. Okay, now we discussed in the previous video which of these elements we were likely to take into images and what we were likely to achieve using CSS. So you'll have a good idea of which bits we're going to be using now. So let's start a new file, 1000 by 1000 pixels, just as a large empty canvas to begin with. We'll call it Sprite and we'll click OK to open that. I'd like to see a grid as well because that will be useful for equally spacing out and distributing our elements. Okay, there we go. We'll do it actual size. Okay, we'll start one by one, just selecting and dragging our bits and pieces over. So there's our logo. We can tuck that up in the top corner. We're going to have now a number of these elements we can achieve with images or with CSS. So we could grab them in any case just to go and use in browsers which can't handle any CSS rules we're going to be using, such as rounded corners, for example. That's one option. Or we could have a separate sprite sheet just for Internet Explorer, which would save load time on the browsers which don't need those images. We're going to just make one sprite sheet for the time being, just for the sake of simplicity. So let's take both these buttons. I'll just put those within that grid there, that grid cell. We could do with this whole thing here as well. Oops. Where is it? Okay. I'll drag this one over. And luckily we don't have too much in the way of graphical bits and bobs anyway. I'm just going to give that some more room just in case I'm chopping any of it off here. Actually I could use a little bit of this texture under that. So I'm going to repeat that, making a second copy, place that underneath, and I'm going to apply that pattern to it. If I remember correctly, it had something to do with freckles. Where is it? There we go. Fade away. Bang, got it. Okay. So that's that one done. We didn't need these because these will be separate images. The map we'll have dealt with using JavaScript. It might be a good idea to grab this send button as well, just to be safe. We can achieve that again with CSS, but we'll take that just for browsers that can't handle that. And now I'm going to grab all three of these icons and drag them over like so. So we have there also select a group. Okay, I'm snapping to the grid, which is making it awkward. I'll tell you what, I'll align them to the underside of these here. Now that's 3 of those, but I could do with all of them in their hover states as well. So let's just make this same color as that. This will be the same color as that, and this will be the same color as well. So that gives us our hover states. Now it might also be a good idea if we copy those and we just take the icon elements as well. Now the reason that's useful is if we decide we're going to use CSS to build our buttons, we will need these icons, but it gives us a little bit more freedom with our background colors. We can even use CSS transitions to slowly fade the hover state in, which is more effective when you're just using hex colors in your CSS file. Okay, so that's dealt with. I'll tell you what, let's have a hover state for this one as well. Okay. Okay. Separate them slightly so there's no confusion. Alright, so we've got our logo, a couple of different buttons here. We've got our, oh, I know what we need to do. We need to grab this arrow and copy that. Again, that's 4. I can't even see it. Let's just colour that for the time being. That's if we want to use CSS to build that button after all. Okay, so that was really all we were going to deal with. Our background, as we discussed, we will need separate tile images for, because it's very difficult to use tiling on a CSS sprite sheet. You can really only tile across either the X or the Y axis. Tiling in both directions is impossible without including all your little bits and bobs in your background. So we've kind of made a jumbly kind of file there. We've got everything we need. We could be more efficient in terms of our layout, but it's not going to be a large file size, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to give that some more white space around it because we're going to need this whole area. Okay, I'll colour that white again, and now let's crop it like so. Don't need much around it. We'll make the background transparent by getting rid of the background. Now I'm going to save it. Let's just save it on my desktop there as a sprite PSD. And I'm also going to save the PNG just so we can see how large the file is. Sprite PNG. Okay. Not sure why that took so long. Okay, so if we close these, we'll now have sprite PSD, which is there. That's always useful to keep as an asset, so that when you need to go back and edit your file, you have everything you need there. We could do with tidying that up in terms of the folder structure and everything, but I'll go back in there now and sort that out to save it in the downloads folder. This is our sprite PNG. It's 700 by 250 pixels, and if we look at the file size, it is a meager 33 KB. So that's fantastic, really. Okay. Now it's also worth noting that there are a couple of services available for automating some of this process. We open up my browser here, you see a couple of them here. Spriteme.org will trawl all the visual assets of any given web page and then compile them into a single sprite sheet for you. And then we have here spritecow.com, which will take any sprite sheet, analyze it, and output the various coordinates and dimensions of each graphic element. Now this can save you some of the hard work when building your CSS file. Okay, it's time for some further reading. So let me just open up the presentation again. There we go. Take a look at this video tutorial by Tom Green. It looks at using sprite sheets when working with Fireworks and Dreamweaver. Now before we jump into the next video, I have an assignment for you, as usual. I'd like you to repeat the process I just followed and build a sprite sheet of your own. You might want to do so in a slightly more organized fashion, saying that. Next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to begin our project by looking at organization. I'm Ian Yates, and from all of us at Tuts Plus, thanks for watching.